Amara sat in her apartment staring at her phone in disbelief. Less than 4 hours after the incident, clips of Officer Wilson pointing his gun at her were playing on every major news network. Her social media was flooded with messages. Some from friends and family checking if she was okay, others from strangers expressing outrage or offering support. She hadn't planned on becoming the center of a national conversation about racial profiling. She just wanted a nice dinner. Her phone rang for what felt like the 100th time. It was her brother, Dion. "Sis, you okay?" His voice was tight with concern. "I'm seeing you all over the news." "I'm fine," Amara assured him, though fine wasn't exactly the right word. Her hands had finally stopped shaking, but the memory of the gun pointed at her chest kept replaying in her mind. "Just a bit overwhelmed. Mom's freaking out. She wants you to come stay with her for a few days." Amara sighed. "Tell her I'm really okay. Captain Barnes took my statement and the district attorney gave me her personal number. They're taking this seriously." "They better be," Dion said. "That officer should be fired today. No investigation needed, it's all on video." Just as they were talking, Amara's phone buzzed with a news alert. She put Dion on speaker and opened the notification. "Hold on," she told her brother. "The police department just issued a statement." She read aloud. "The city police department is aware of an incident that occurred this evening at Le Bistro Elegance involving Officer Paul Wilson and a patron. Officer Wilson has been placed on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation. The department takes allegations of misconduct extremely seriously and does not condone actions that violate our policies or the trust of our community. Chief Thompson will be addressing the media tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. "Administrative leave," Dion scoffed. "Paid vacation, you mean?" Amara didn't respond immediately. She was thinking about the look on Wilson's face when his captain had arrived. The moment he realized the magnitude of his mistake. She'd seen that look before in young soldiers who'd made critical errors in judgment. "The system needs to work," she finally said. "If it doesn't, nothing changes." "That's my big sister," Dion said, his voice softening. Always the logical one. After hanging up with her brother, Amara poured herself a glass of wine and sat on her couch, finally allowing herself to process the emotions she'd kept in check throughout the ordeal. There had been moments, especially when Wilson first drew his weapon when she'd been genuinely afraid for her life. One wrong move, one misinterpreted gesture, and things could have ended very differently. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Captain Barnes. "Captain Johnson just wanted to check in. The chief would like to speak with you tomorrow if you're willing. This incident is being taken extremely seriously at the highest levels." Amara texted back her agreement. She had planned to take a few days off after her deployment before reporting back to base, but it seemed her break would be busy in a different way than she'd anticipated. Turning on the TV, she found herself on every news channel. Different angles of the confrontation played on a loop. Commentators discussing the implications, the pattern of similar incidents across the country. Some networks racist cop points gun at female military officer in luxury restaurant, then loses job immediately. The golden light of sunset spilled through the tall windows of Le Bistro Elegance, casting a warm glow across the white tablecloths and crystal glasses. Captain Amara Johnson let out a soft sigh of contentment as she took another bite of her perfectly cooked salmon. After 6 long months in the dusty heat of her overseas deployment, this peaceful evening was exactly what she needed. Amara had spent an hour getting ready for this dinner, trading her military uniform for a simple blue dress that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. Her natural hair was styled in loose curls, and a delicate gold necklace, a gift from her grandmother, hung around her neck. Her military ID and wallet sat tucked away in her small purse beside her. "Can I get you anything else, ma'am?" asked the waiter, refilling her water glass. "Just the dessert menu when you have a moment," Amara replied with a smile. "The food is amazing." She glanced around the restaurant, taking in the elegant decor and the soft classical music playing. In the background, most tables were filled with couples dressed in expensive clothes, business people in suits, and a few families celebrating special occasions. Amara noticed she was one of the few people of color in the restaurant, but she was used to that. As a captain in the army, she often found herself the only black woman in the room. Outside the restaurant, Officer Paul Wilson pulled up in his patrol car, lights off. The dispatcher had called in a report about a suspicious person lurking in the parking lot, possibly casing cars. Wilson had been on the force for 15 years and prided himself on his instincts. He was tired after a long shift dealing with what he considered time wasters, calls that led nowhere and paperwork that kept him from real police work. Wilson adjusted his belt as he walked into the restaurant, nodding at the maitre d' who looked slightly alarmed at the sudden appearance of a police officer. "Good evening, officer. How can I help you?" the maitre d' asked, keeping his voice low to avoid disturbing the diners. "Got a call about suspicious activity in your parking lot," Wilson replied, his eyes already scanning the restaurant. "Thought I'd check inside too, make sure everything's okay." The maitre d' began to explain that everything seemed fine inside, but Wilson had already spotted Amara sitting alone at her corner table. Something about her made him pause. In his mind, she didn't quite fit with the usual clientele of Le Bistrot Elegance. Why would someone like her be dining alone in such an expensive place? Without waiting for the maitre d' to finish speaking, Wilson made his way across the restaurant, weaving between tables of people enjoying their meals. A few heads turned to watch him, conversations quieting as he passed. Amara was just checking her phone, smiling at a text from her brother asking how her fancy dinner was going, when she sensed someone standing beside her table. Looking up, she found herself face to face with a police officer whose expression was anything but friendly. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification," Wilson stated flatly. No introduction, no explanation for why he was singling her out among dozens of other diners. The nearby conversations stuttered to a halt. A waiter carrying a tray of drinks paused mid-step. The soft clink of cutlery against plates continued from the far side of the restaurant where people hadn't yet noticed what was happening. But around Amara's table, a bubble of tense silence formed. Amara's military training kicked in immediately. She remained calm, her posture straight but not threatening. Years of handling high-pressure situations had taught her to keep her voice steady and her movements slow. "May I ask why you need my ID, officer?" she asked politely, meeting his gaze. Wilson's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to people questioning him. "We've had reports of fraud in this area, just routine checks." Amara glanced around the restaurant, noticing that no one else was being asked for identification. An older couple at the next table exchanged uncomfortable looks. A businessman pretended to be interested in his menu while clearly listening to every word. "I see," Amara said carefully. "And are you checking everyone's ID tonight, or just mine?" The maitre d' had followed Wilson across the restaurant and now hovered anxiously nearby. "Officer, is there a problem?" "This guest is—" "I'm handling this," Wilson cut him off sharply, his hand shifting to rest on his belt close to his holster. "Ma'am, your ID. Now." Amara felt a chill run down her spine as she noticed the slight shift in the officer's stance. She'd seen that body language before. The tensing shoulders, the widened stance, the hand near the weapon. This was escalating, and quickly. Across the restaurant, an older woman whispered to her husband. A young server stood frozen with a dessert tray. The manager emerged from the kitchen, immediately assessing the situation with growing alarm. "My ID is in my purse," Amara said clearly, making no move to reach for it. "It's right here beside me. I'm happy to show it to you, but I'd like to understand why I'm being singled out." Wilson's face flushed slightly. "I don't have to explain police procedures to you. This is a simple request. Unless you have something to hide?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Amara felt dozens of eyes on her, watching, judging. She thought of her commander's words during training. Sometimes the bravest thing is keeping your cool when everything around you is chaos. "I have nothing to hide, officer," she replied evenly. "I'm simply having dinner after returning from military deployment. I'm a captain in the United States Army." For a brief moment, uncertainty flickered across Wilson's face, but it was quickly replaced by determination. He'd gone too far to back down now. Your ID, he repeated, his voice harder this time. Right now, several people in the restaurant had pulled out their phones by now, sensing that something was very wrong with this situation. The restaurant manager, Thomas Chen, hurried over from where he'd been watching with growing concern. "Officer, excuse me," Chen said, his voice professional but firm. "This guest arrived less than an hour ago. She's been nothing but polite to my staff. Is there something specific?" "I told you to stay out of this," Wilson snapped, not even looking at Chen. His eyes remained fixed on. "Keep your hands where I can see them," Wilson ordered, his right hand now moving from his belt to rest directly on his holstered gun. A woman at a nearby table gasped audibly. An elderly man stood up from his chair, looking uncertain about whether to intervene. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Sir, please," Chen tried again. "This is unnecessary. We have security cameras if there's been—" "Back away now," Wilson barked at Chen, his face reddening further. The combination of being questioned by Amara, the growing audience, and his own fatigue had created a perfect storm of anger and wounded pride. Amara kept her hands visible on the table, fighting to keep her own fear from showing. She had faced danger before, but there was something particularly terrifying about being threatened in a place where she should have been safe, surrounded by luxury and fine china. "Officer, I'm going to reach for my purse now," she said clearly, wanting to make sure everyone in the restaurant heard her words. "It's right here beside me. My military ID is inside." Wilson's jaw clenched. No sudden movements. The restaurant had fallen completely silent. Even the kitchen staff had emerged to see what was happening. A young busboy stood frozen with a stack of plates, his eyes wide with fear. With excruciating slowness, Amara began to reach toward her small purse. Her fingers had barely touched the clasp when Wilson suddenly drew his weapon and pointed it directly at her chest. "I said no sudden movements." Screams erupted from around the restaurant. People dropped to the floor or scrambled away from tables. A glass shattered somewhere as someone knocked it over in their panic. But Amara didn't move a muscle. She'd had weapons pointed at her during her deployment. She knew that any sudden motion now could be catastrophic. Her training kicked in completely as she froze, her hands now raised slightly, palms facing forward. "Officer," she said, her voice somehow still steady despite the gun aimed at her heart. "I am Captain Amara Johnson of the United States Army, 3rd Infantry Division. I was simply reaching for my identification as you requested. My movements were slow and deliberate." The manager had backed away at the sight of the drawn weapon, his face ashen. Several diners were openly filming now, their phones capturing every moment of the confrontation. "I have done nothing wrong," Amara continued, looking directly at Wilson. "I am unarmed. I am simply having dinner, and you are pointing a loaded weapon at a serving member of the United States military." Wilson's hand trembled slightly. Something in Amara's calm demeanor and the mention of her military service had pierced through his anger, making him suddenly aware of the dozens of witnesses and the cameras recording his every move. "My military ID and driver's license are in my purse," Amara said. "I'd be happy to show them to you if you'll allow me to reach for them safely." An older couple sitting by the window had their hands over their mouths in shock. The woman was crying silently. A family with 2 teenage children had moved to the far wall, the parents standing protectively in front of their kids. The restaurant's host was speaking frantically into a phone at the front desk, likely calling 911. Beads of sweat formed on Wilson's forehead. The gun in his hand seemed heavier by the second. He had drawn weapons before during his 15 years on the force, but never in a crowded restaurant, never on an unarmed woman who was speaking calmly and rationally to him. "Just do it slowly," he finally said, the gun still aimed at her. Amara nodded once, maintaining eye contact with Wilson as her right hand moved with deliberate slowness toward her purse. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but her hand remained steady, a skill honed through years of high-pressure situations. Her fingers closed around the small black purse, and she carefully brought it closer to her on the table. No sudden movements, nothing that could be misinterpreted. The entire restaurant seemed to be holding its breath. "I'm going to open the clasp now," she narrated, her voice the only sound in the hushed space. "Then I'll reach inside for my wallet, which contains my ID. Wilson nodded stiffly, his eyes darting between her face and her hands. With careful precision, Amara opened the purse and slid her fingers inside, withdrawing a slim wallet. She placed the purse back on the table and opened the wallet, revealing her military ID card prominently displayed in the front window. "Here's my military identification," she said, turning the wallet so Wilson could see it clearly. "And my driver's license is right behind it." Wilson's eyes flicked to the ID, then back to her face, comparing the photo to the woman sitting before him. The military insignia was unmistakable: Captain Amara Johnson, United States Army. A flicker of doubt crossed his face, followed quickly by the dawning realization that he had made a terrible mistake. The gun in his hand lowered slightly, but not completely. "You can take it if you want to examine it more closely," Amara offered, still keeping her movements slow and predictable. Outside, the wail of sirens grew louder. Someone had indeed called the police. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the restaurant. They were calling the police because of the police. The restaurant owner had made his way to Wilson's side now, his expression a mix of outrage and concern. "Officer, please lower your weapon. This has gone far enough." The tension in the room was becoming unbearable. Children were crying. An elderly man appeared to be having trouble breathing, his wife frantically fanning him with a menu. "Wilson." A sharp voice cut through the restaurant as a uniformed police captain burst through the front door, taking in the scene with a quick, practiced glance. "Lower your weapon immediately." Relief washed over Amara's face as Wilson finally lowered his gun, though he didn't immediately holster it. "Captain Barnes," Wilson began, his voice unsteady. "I was responding to a suspicious person call and—" "Holster your weapon," Barnes ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Now." The gun finally returned to its holster. A collective sigh of relief swept through the restaurant. Amara's shoulders relaxed slightly, though she maintained her composed posture. Barnes turned to her, his face professionally neutral, but his eyes showing genuine concern. "Ma'am, are you all right?" "Yes, sir," Amara replied, finally allowing herself to take a deep breath. "I'm Captain Amara Johnson, United States Army." "May I see your identification, please?" Barnes asked, his tone respectful, entirely different from Wilson's demanding approach minutes earlier. "Of course." Amara handed him her military ID and driver's license with steady hands. Barnes examined them briefly before returning them, with a nod. "Captain Johnson, I apologize for this incident. I assure you it will be addressed appropriately." He turned to Wilson, his expression hardening. "Officer Wilson, outside. Now." As Wilson followed his superior officer toward the door, his shoulders slumped in defeat, whispers began to ripple through the restaurant. People slowly rose from where they had taken cover. Phones were still recording, capturing every moment of the aftermath. From a corner table, a well-dressed woman stood up. "Officer, I'm Nicole Rivera, District Attorney for this county," she announced clearly. "What you're doing right now is completely unacceptable. Lower your weapon immediately." Wilson's eyes darted to the woman, then back to Amara, uncertainty now clearly visible on his face. At another table, an older man in a tailored suit also rose to his feet. "And I'm Dr. Raj Patel, Chief of Surgery at Memorial Hospital. I'm recording this entire incident. There are at least a dozen witnesses here who can attest this woman has done nothing wrong." "Officer Wilson," the restaurant owner said, having arrived from his office at the back. "I know your sergeant personally. I've already called him. This is absolutely unacceptable behavior in my establishment." Wilson looked around, suddenly aware that he was surrounded by powerful, influential people who were witnessing his actions. His arm wavered, but the gun remained pointed at Amara. "I'm doing my job," he insisted, but his voice had lost its edge of authority. "I have reasonable suspicion." "Based on what exactly?" Amara asked, her voice steady despite the weapon aimed at her. "Please explain your reasonable suspicion for the record." The question hung in the air. More than half the restaurant had their phones out now, recording the confrontation. Wilson's face showed a mix of anger, confusion, and the dawning realization that he had made a terrible mistake. "Well, officer?" the district attorney prompted. "We're all waiting to hear what specific, articulable facts led you to draw your weapon on this woman who was simply having dinner." Wilson's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The hand holding his weapon began to shake visibly. "I think," Dr. Patel said firmly, "that we can all see what the real reason is." The implication was clear to everyone in the room. Several people nodded in agreement, their faces showing disgust. "Officer Wilson," Amara said, still completely composed, "I understand you're in a difficult position now. I suggest you holster your weapon before this situation gets any worse. My ID is in my purse, as I've stated multiple times. I'm happy to show it to you or to your supervisor when they arrive." The soft wail of approaching sirens could be heard from outside. Someone had called 911. Wilson stood frozen for several more seconds, the gun still aimed at Amara. The shaking in his hand had become more pronounced. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "Paul," a deep voice called from the entrance. An older officer, in a captain's uniform, strode quickly through the restaurant. "Lower your weapon, now." Wilson finally lowered his gun, though he didn't immediately holster it. The tension in the room decreased by a fraction, but all eyes remained fixed on the scene. "Captain Barnes," Wilson began, "I was responding to a call." "Holster your weapon," Barnes ordered sharply, "and step back." Wilson finally returned his gun to its holster and took 2 steps away from Amara's table. Captain Barnes turned to Amara. "Ma'am, I apologize for this incident. Are you all right?" "Yes, sir," Amara replied, finally allowing herself to take a deep breath. Her hands, which had remained steady throughout the confrontation, now trembled slightly as she lowered them to the table. Barnes turned to Wilson. "Outside, now." His voice was low but carried an unmistakable authority that made Wilson pale. As Wilson walked toward the exit, his shoulders slumped in defeat, Barnes turned back to Amara. "Ma'am, may I see your identification, please?" "Of course," Amara said, reaching carefully for her purse. She opened it and withdrew her military ID and driver's license, handing them to Barnes. The captain examined them briefly, then returned them with a respectful nod. "Captain Johnson, I apologize profoundly for what happened here tonight. I assure you this will be addressed appropriately." "Thank you," Amara said, her composure still intact despite the ordeal. Barnes addressed the restaurant at large. "Ladies and gentlemen, the situation is under control. I apologize for the disruption to your evening. If anyone recorded this incident, I would appreciate copies for our investigation." At least 15 hands went up, phones still recording. "I'll take statements from anyone who witnessed what happened," Barnes continued. "Starting with you, Captain Johnson, if you're willing." Amara nodded. "I am." As Barnes pulled up a chair, the restaurant slowly began to return to normal. Waiters cautiously resumed service. Conversations gradually started up again, though every single one was about what they had just witnessed. Outside, through the large front windows, they could see Captain Barnes confronting Wilson in the parking lot. Though they couldn't hear the words, the captain's body language made it clear. Officer Wilson was in serious trouble. District Attorney Rivera approached Amara's table with a business card in hand. "Captain Johnson, I'd like to speak with you when you're finished giving your statement. What happened here tonight was inexcusable, and I want to make sure it's addressed properly." Dr. Patel joined them, showing Amara his phone. "I have the entire incident recorded from the moment he drew his weapon. I'll send it to you both. This kind of behavior cannot be tolerated." Amara thanked them both, still processing what had just happened. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, leaving her feeling slightly shaky. The restaurant owner returned with a glass of water for her. "Captain, your dinner is on the house tonight. I am so sorry this happened in my establishment." "Thank you, but that's not necessary," Amara said. "None of this was your fault." "I insist," he said firmly, "and please know you are always welcome here." As Barnes took her statement, Amara recounted the events precisely and factually. Her military training had taught her to observe details, even in high-stress situations, and she provided a clear account of everything that had happened from the moment Wilson approached her table. He never stated why he singled me out, she explained. There were at least 30 other diners here, but he came directly to my table and demanded ID without explanation. Barnes nodded grimly, taking notes. Did he mention anything about responding to a call about suspicious activity in the parking lot? No, Amara replied. He only said there had been reports of fraud in the area. After I asked why he needed my ID, he never mentioned anything about the parking lot or why he came into the restaurant in the first place. Around them, other officers had arrived and were taking statements from witnesses. The restaurant's security manager had brought up footage from the surveillance cameras, showing the entire incident from multiple angles. May I ask what will happen to Officer Wilson? Amara asked as they finished. He's been relieved of duty immediately, Barnes said without hesitation. He'll be placed on administrative leave pending an investigation, but between the video evidence and witness statements, he paused, looking genuinely troubled. I've been on the force for 23 years, Captain Johnson. This is not how we train our officers to behave. This is not what we stand for. I understand, Amara said. I've been in command positions too. You can train people, but sometimes their personal biases override their training in the moment. Barnes nodded, impressed by her insight and composure. Would you be willing to participate in our investigation going forward? Your perspective would be valuable. Of course, Amara agreed. I want to help make sure this doesn't happen to someone else. As Barnes stood to speak with other witnesses, Amara found herself surrounded by well-wishers. Other diners stopped by her table to express their support and outrage at what they had witnessed. Many gave her their contact information, offering to provide statements or testimony if needed. A young woman who had been sitting at a nearby table approached nervously. Captain Johnson, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I just wanted to say, the way you handled that, it was amazing. I don't think I could have been so calm with a gun pointed at me. Amara gave her a tired smile. Thank you. It's part of my training, but to be honest, it wasn't easy. Well, I think you're incredible, the young woman said. And I'm so sorry this happened to you. By the time Amara was ready to leave, nearly 2 hours had passed. The restaurant had mostly emptied, though a few curious onlookers remained. Captain Barnes escorted her to her car personally. We'll be in touch in the coming days, he assured her. And again, I am deeply sorry about tonight. Amara nodded, finally feeling the full weight of exhaustion settling over her. Thank you for handling it appropriately when you arrived. It could have ended very differently. As she drove home through the quiet streets, Amara's hands still trembled slightly on the steering wheel. The evening that was supposed to be a peaceful celebration of her return home had turned into something that would likely change her life forever. One thought kept running through her mind. What if she hadn't been a captain in the army? What if she had been just an ordinary woman without that training, without that title? What might have happened then? I'll take statements from anyone who witnessed what happened, Barnes continued. Starting with you, Captain Johnson, if you're willing. Amara nodded. I am. As Barnes pulled up a chair, the restaurant slowly began to return to normal. Waiters cautiously resumed service. Conversations gradually started up again, though every single one was about what they had just witnessed. Outside, through the large front windows, they could see Captain Barnes confronting Wilson in the parking lot. Though they couldn't hear the words, the captain's body language made it clear. Officer Wilson was in serious trouble. District Attorney Rivera approached Amara's table with a business card in hand. Captain Johnson, I'd like to speak with you when you're finished giving your statement. What happened here tonight was inexcusable, and I want to make sure it's addressed properly. Dr. Patel joined them, showing Amara his phone. I have the entire incident recorded from the moment he drew his weapon. I'll send it to you both. This kind of behavior cannot be tolerated. Amara thanked them both, still processing what had just happened. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, leaving her feeling slightly shaky. The restaurant owner returned with a glass of water for her. Captain, your dinner is on the house tonight. I am so sorry this happened in my establishment. Thank But that's not necessary, Amara said. None of this was your fault. I insist, he said firmly. And please know you are always welcome here. As Barnes took her statement, Amara recounted the events precisely and factually. Her military training had taught her to observe details, even in high-stress situations, and she provided a clear account of everything that had happened from the moment Wilson approached her table. He never stated why he singled me out, she explained. There were at least 30 other diners here, but he came directly to my table and demanded ID without explanation. Barnes nodded grimly, taking notes. Did he mention anything about responding to a call about suspicious activity in the parking lot? No, Amara replied. He only said there had been reports of fraud in the area after I asked why he needed my ID. He never mentioned anything about the parking lot or why he came into the restaurant in the first place. Around them, other officers had arrived and were taking statements from witnesses. The restaurant's security manager had brought up footage from the surveillance cameras, showing the entire incident from multiple angles. May I ask what will happen to Officer Wilson? Amara asked as they finished. He's been relieved of duty immediately, Barnes said without hesitation. He'll be placed on administrative leave pending an investigation, but between the video evidence and witness statements, he paused, looking genuinely troubled. I've been on the force for 23 years, Captain Johnson. This is not how we train our officers to behave. This is not what we stand for. I understand, Amara said. I've been in command positions too. You can train people, but sometimes their personal biases override their training in the moment. Barnes nodded, impressed by her insight and composure. Would you be willing to participate in our investigation going forward? Your perspective would be valuable. Of course, Amara agreed. I want to help make sure this doesn't happen to someone else. As Barnes stood to speak with other witnesses, Amara found herself surrounded by well-wishers. Other diners stopped by her table to express their support and outrage at what they had witnessed. Many gave her their contact information, offering to provide statements or testimony if needed. A young woman who had been sitting at a nearby table approached nervously. Captain Johnson, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I just wanted to say, the way you handled that. It was amazing. I don't think I could have been so calm with a gun pointed at me. Amara gave her a tired smile. Thank you. It's part of my training, but to be honest, it wasn't easy. Well, I think you're incredible, the young woman said. And I'm so sorry this happened to you. By the time Amara was ready to leave, nearly 2 hours had passed. The restaurant had mostly emptied, though a few curious onlookers remained. Captain Barnes escorted her to her car personally. We'll be in touch in the coming days, he assured her. And again, I am deeply sorry about tonight. Amara nodded, finally feeling the full weight of exhaustion settling over her. Thank you for handling it appropriately when you arrived. It could have ended very differently. As she drove home through the quiet streets, Amara's hands still trembled slightly on the steering wheel. The evening that was supposed to be a peaceful celebration of her return home had turned into something that would likely change her life forever. One thought kept running through her mind. What if she hadn't been a captain in the army? What if she had been just an ordinary woman without that training, without that title? What might have happened then? Within minutes, Police Captain Richard Barnes arrived at the scene, having been contacted by the restaurant owner. Assessing the situation immediately, he ordered Hartman to holster his weapon. Captain Reynolds, I apologize profoundly for this incident, Barnes said after confirming Simone's identity. He turned to Hartman. Officer Hartman, surrender your badge and gun. You're suspended effective immediately. As Hartman was escorted out, Captain Barnes remained to take statements from Simone and the witnesses. The videos of the incident had already begun circulating on social media, quickly gaining national attention. That evening, the police department issued a formal statement condemning Hartman's actions and announcing his suspension pending investigation. By morning, news outlets across the country were covering the story, featuring interviews with witnesses and experts discussing racial profiling in law enforcement. 3 days after the incident, Amara sat in her living room with District Attorney Rivera, watching the Emergency Police Commission hearing on television. The commission had called the special session specifically to address what had happened at Le Bistro Elegance, now referred to by the media simply as the restaurant incident. They're going to announce their decision, Rivera said, leaning forward as Commission Chairwoman Diane Taylor approached the microphone. After reviewing all available evidence, including Officer Wilson's body camera footage, restaurant security footage, numerous witness videos, and statements from all parties involved, the Police Commission has voted unanimously to terminate Officer Paul Wilson effective immediately. Amara exhaled slowly. It was the outcome she'd expected given the overwhelming evidence, but hearing it made official brought a strange mix of relief and sadness. A man had lost his career because of a terrible mistake driven by bias. Additionally, Chairwoman Taylor continued, we have ordered a full review of all previous complaints against Officer Wilson that did not result in disciplinary action. Chief Thompson has agreed to implement a new department-wide training program focused on implicit bias recognition and de-escalation techniques. The press conference continued, with reporters shouting questions. Rivera muted the TV. That was fast, Amara said quietly. Usually these investigations take weeks or months. Rivera nodded. The video evidence was irrefutable. Plus, the mayor and chief were getting hundreds of calls and emails every hour. The public pressure was intense. What happens now? Amara asked. Officer Wilson can appeal, but it won't go anywhere. The district attorney's office is also considering criminal charges for excessive force and civil rights violations. Rivera paused. And I'm guessing you'll be getting calls from civil attorneys about a lawsuit. Amara had already received several messages from high-profile lawyers offering to represent her. The thought of a lawsuit made her uncomfortable. She wasn't looking for money or revenge. I'm not sure that's what I want, she admitted. Rivera studied her thoughtfully. What do you want, Captain Johnson? The question caught Amara off guard. She hadn't really had time to think about what she wanted from this situation. Everything had happened so quickly. I want change, she said finally. Real change. Not just one officer losing his job. The following day, Amara found herself in the mayor's office, sitting across from Mayor Andrea Chen and Police Chief Thompson. They'd invited her to discuss the city's response to the incident. Captain Johnson, first let me say again how deeply sorry we are for what you experienced, Mayor Chen began. We're committed to making sure nothing like this happens again in our city. Chief Thompson nodded. We're implementing immediate changes in our training and protocols, but we'd like your input. Your perspective would be invaluable. Amara had come prepared. I appreciate that. I've thought a lot about this, and I have some ideas. Over the next hour, she outlined her thoughts. Body cameras that couldn't be turned off during encounters, civilian oversight of complaint investigations, regular implicit bias training with measurable outcomes, community engagement programs that brought officers and residents together in non-enforcement settings. These aren't new ideas, she acknowledged, but they need to be implemented with real commitment, not just as box-checking exercises. The mayor and chief listened attentively, taking notes. Would you be willing to consult with us on implementing these changes? Mayor Chen asked. Your military leadership experience combined with your personal perspective on this incident would make you uniquely qualified. Amara hadn't expected this request. I'd need to discuss it with my commanding officer, but yes, I'd be interested. As she left City Hall, reporters called out questions. Amara had become more comfortable with the media attention over the past few days, but she still found it strange to see her face on television and in newspapers. Captain Johnson, how do you feel about Officer Wilson's termination? Do you plan to sue the city? What message do you have for other police officers? She paused briefly. I believe justice is being served. My focus now is on working with city leaders to ensure that what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else. Back at her apartment, Amara found an email from a local community organization called United for Change. They were inviting her to speak at an upcoming forum on Police community relations. Similar invitations had come from civil rights groups, universities, and even a national morning talk show. Her phone rang. Colonel Rivera again. "Johnson, I've been talking with the Pentagon about your situation," he said after they'd exchanged greetings. "They're interested in having you work with military police training programs on bias awareness. It would be a special assignment for 6 months, maybe longer if it goes well." "Really?" Amara was surprised. That sounds perfect. I thought you might like it. You'd be making a difference on a national scale." That evening, Amara met her brother Dion for dinner, at a different restaurant this time. "Look at you," he said proudly as they sat down. "From being held at gunpoint to changing police training across the country in less than a week." Amara laughed. "Let's not exaggerate. Nothing's changed yet. It's all just talk at this point. But it's talk that wouldn't be happening without you," Dion insisted. "You stood your ground. You stayed calm when most people would have panicked. And now you're using your voice to make real change." Amara thought about that as she drove home. She hadn't asked for any of this attention, but now that she had it, maybe she could use it for good. 6 weeks later, Amara stood at a podium in the police academy auditorium, facing a room full of cadets in their crisp uniforms. Behind her was a new training video that included footage from the restaurant incident, along with interviews and expert commentary. "What you just saw," she told the cadets, "was a moment where training failed, where bias overrode judgment, and where a situation that should have never escalated came dangerously close to tragedy." She looked out at their young, serious faces. "I'm not here to make you feel guilty or defensive. I'm here to help you recognize the split-second assumptions we all make and how those assumptions can lead to devastating consequences when you carry a badge and a gun." After her presentation, several cadets approached her with questions. One young woman, her eyes intense, asked, "How do you feel about police now, after what happened to you?" Amara considered the question carefully. "I believe in the importance of good policing. That hasn't changed. What happened to me was the result of one officer's poor judgment. But the response from Captain Barnes and Chief Thompson showed me that there are also good officers working to uphold their oath to protect and serve everyone equally." The city had implemented many of Amara's suggested reforms. Officer Wilson's personnel file had been made public, revealing a pattern of similar complaints that had been inadequately addressed over the years. This transparency had sparked a department-wide review of complaint procedures and disciplinary actions. National news outlets were calling the city's response a model for other departments facing similar issues. The restaurant incident had become a case study in police training programs across the country. As Amara packed up her materials after the training session, Chief Thompson approached her. "That was excellent, Captain. You're making a real difference here." "I hope so," she said. "I know so," he replied. "Our excessive force complaints are already down 30% since we implemented your training program." Amara smiled. "That's good to hear." As she walked to her car, Amara thought about how a traumatic experience had turned into an opportunity to create meaningful change. She hadn't sought the spotlight, but now that she had it, she was determined to use it wisely. The next day, she would fly to Washington to meet with federal law enforcement officials about expanding her training program nationally. What had begun as a simple dinner out had become a catalyst for reform that might help prevent similar incidents in the future. And that, Amara thought as she drove home, was something worth fighting for.